Hi students, I'm back with 9.5b. Today's lesson is going to focus on factoring trinomials with magic. That's right, folks, we're going to be doing some factoring using some magic. Our essential question today is, what does it mean to factor a trinomial, and how do I break it down to make the process a little bit easier? As we learned in an earlier lesson, factoring and distributing or expanding are opposites of each other. So that's what you see here in the beginning part of this set of notes. We're going to take a moment and review expanding so that we can help make more connections to the process of factoring. Now, we call both of these types of terms binomials. They're called binomials because they have two terms in each set of parentheses. When we learned to expand these, we said we would place each term across the top of the boxes, and in the second binomial, we'd place them along the side. Next, we multiplied and got the product by placing the numbers inside the boxes. X times 9 is 9x, and 9 times negative 2 is negative 18. This ends up expanding to x squared plus 7x minus 18. Recall that middle term of 7x is found by combining like terms of the middle, or the terms that both have x's. Now, when we start to think about how would you reverse this, there's a couple questions that will help us make the process of reversing it much easier. I refer to these as our magic questions. What the magic questions do is they connect the trinomial, three terms, to breaking up that middle term and finding these middle numbers. The magic questions are going to ask us to find what adds to equal 7. 7 is the middle number in the trinomial. The second question we ask is what multiplies to equal, in this case, negative 18. Negative 18 is technically the product of an invisible 1 out front and the last number or term, which is negative 18. Next, we need to brainstorm or think about which two numbers would make this true. Now, as you think about this, I find it's easiest if I list the factors of the 18 or the product. Factors of 18 are 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. And as I look at these factors, these are the two that actually have a difference of 7. So that tells me that 9 and 2 are going to be the factors I want to use. However, 9 plus 2 is 11, which means I need to make the 2 negative. And I want to make sure that it fulfills both requirements. So it's very important you go back and check. Is 9 times negative 2 negative 18? It is. We're good to go. Let's move on to the next part of the process. Now that we've determined the magic questions and the numbers that work, these numbers are going to be connected to that middle term. So we're going to attach an x, the variable x, to it, because remember, these two numbers add up to the middle term that you see in your initial problem. The remaining two values that we have go in the first corner, so x squared, and the last number of your trinomial goes in the bottom. Your box should always add up to what you started with. We are now to the point where we get to factor. We're going to factor out what is in common. I like to ask the question, what multiplies to the number or term inside the box? In this case, x times x is x squared. What times x is negative 2x? In this case, that is negative 2. What times x is 9x? In this case, that's 9. And I always like to double check, is 9 times negative 2 negative 18? And it is. So we've now successfully factored this to x plus 9 times x minus 2. I know these problems were the same, but it's important to see how they relate to each other and how expanding is connecting to factoring. So let's take a minute and summarize the process that we just talked about. The first thing I highly recommend students doing is identifying the a, b, and c of the trinomial. A is going to be whatever's in front of the x squared. B is whatever's in front of the x term. And c is the number that is all by itself at the end. Next, we create our magic questions by asking what adds to equal the b value and what multiplies to equal the product of a times c. For us, a will usually be 1, but be careful, sometimes it can be something else. The third and final step is to fill in the box and factor out what is in common. Notice that the first term, or the a term, goes in the first box. The c term goes in the bottom corner, or bottom right-hand corner. And the terms that actually go in the diagonal are going to be the terms you get from answering your magic questions. Remember, these two sets of blanks should be the same pair of numbers. We also want to remind you that those are going to have the x attached because they are representing the middle term in your trinomial. Great job. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple examples. Now, to begin, let's focus on steps 1 and 2 only. So we have x squared plus 2x minus 8. First step of the process said to figure out what a, b, and c is. So a in this case is 1, b is 2, and c is negative 8. Step 2 of the process is to list your magic questions and solve. So our magic questions are saying what adds to b, or 2, and multiplies to equal negative 8. When I do look at these, I think of my factors of 8. 8 are 1 and 8, and 2 and 4. Very quickly, I can see that 2 and 4 are going to be the numbers that will allow me to eventually add to 2. But one of them needs to be negative. If I make the 2 negative, it will make these magic questions correct. Let's go ahead and take a look at 2 more. In this case, again, a is 1, b is 3, and c is negative 10. So we want to ask ourselves what adds to equal 3 and multiplies to equal negative 10. Thinking of my factors of negative 10, 1 and 10, and 2 and 5. You're probably getting pretty good at figuring this out. 2 and 5 work, but I need to make sure one of these numbers is negative or it won't multiply to a negative 10. Quickly, I can see that if I make the 2 negative, it makes both of these statements correct. Let's do just one more before we put the process completely together. In C, we have a equals 1, b equals negative 4, and c equals 3. I'm going to ask what adds to equal negative 4 and multiplies to equal 3. Well, the only factors of 3 are 1 and 3. And 1 times 3 does equal 3, but 1 plus 3 is not negative 4. So if I want it to add to negative 4, I need to make both of these negative. Is negative 1 times negative 3 positive 3? It is. So in this case, our two magic numbers are going to be negative 1 and negative 3. All right, let's move on to the next part, putting the process completely together. So again, just to summarize one more time before we do it all together, identify A, B, and C, figure out your answers to your magic questions, fill in the box, and factor. All right, I have two examples for us to practice here. In example A, we will have A equaling 1, B equaling 4, and C equaling -2. I want to know what adds to 4 and multiplies to -12. Sorry, C is -12. I apologize. All right, so I list my factors of 12. I have 1 times 12, I have 2 times 6, and I have 3 times 4. It's very quickly I can see that 2 and 6 are going to help with this problem. And when I look at this, I go, 2 needs to be negative. Now we're going to combine it and put it all together. So I'm going to put -2x and 6x in the boxes diagonal from each other. And I'm going to place x squared and -12 in the remaining two boxes. Next, I'm going to factor out what's in common. X times x is x squared. What times x equals 6x? That's a 6. And what times x equals -2x? That's a -2. Again, I like to check, is 6 times -2 -12? And it is. So we have factored this to x plus 6 times x minus 2. Let's go ahead and look at just one more example before we end for today. Factor x squared minus 13x plus 42. To begin, let's find A, B, and C. A is 1, B is -13, and C is 42. So what adds to equal -13 and multiplies to equal positive 42? 42 has lots of factors. 1 times 42, 2 times 21, 3 times 14, and 6 times 7. As I look at all these different factors, there's only one that seems to be able to work with that 13 number. So 6 and 7 must be our factors. However, I need to make both of them negative in order for it to work out and add to -13. So I have -6x and -7x. X squared goes in the top box and 42 goes in the bottom. Now we're ready to factor. What times what equals x squared? That's x. What times x equals -7x? -7. What times x equals -6x? -6. And is -6 times -7 positive 42? It is. We've successfully factored another quadratic, x minus 7 times x minus 6. I hope this helped you in learning how to factor. Check back for additional videos.